Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. We are now less than 50 days from Election Day, 15 days from the first 2020 presidential debate, and 16 days away from a potential government shutdown. The coronavirus pandemic has radically altered the nation's economic landscape and challenged President Trump's strongest polling point. Now his campaign is attempting to pivot, positioning the president as the guardian of the American suburbs. He and Democratic nominee Joe Biden are offering very different views about systemic racism in law enforcement and how the government should respond to protests across the nation.
The words of a president matter. No matter if they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. No matter how competent or incompetent the president is, they can send a nation to war, they can bring peace, they can make markets rise or fall.
But they want to punish you for praying in church while they let agitators and arsonists burn your churches down.
With just 50 days until the election, the president has not made meaningful attempts to expand his loyal base of support, and it remains to be seen if the administration's handling of COVID-19 and audio recordings of the president acknowledging he intentionally downplayed the severity of the virus will hurt his re-election prospects. Publicly, the president was optimistic.
I would love to aim it right at Easter Sunday, so we're open for church service and services generally on Easter Sunday.
We've now learned privately the president knew that was unlikely.
You just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people.
Since then, the president has pushed unproven treatments for the virus and disparaged his opponent for wearing a mask. Both candidates have begun to embark on a series of campaign events, though they look vastly different. The president's gatherings feature crowds of largely unmasked supporters, including at last night's indoor event in Nevada. Joe Biden's events have been smaller, with the candidate and attendees often masked. And even though we're still 50 days away from polls closing, the election is already underway. In battleground North Carolina, more than 22,000 mail ballots have already been accepted by the state. And as the nation approaches 200,000 deaths from the coronavirus, a record number of Americans are set to vote by mail amid concerns over being able to vote safely in the middle of a pandemic. In total, more than 80% of the country can vote by mail this fall. All but 6 states are allowing people to vote by mail or vote absentee without an excuse this year. On top of that, 5 states begin in-person early voting this week. Minnesota, South Dakota, Virginia, and Wyoming open polls Friday, and New Jersey begins on Saturday. In total, 38 states plus Washington, D.C. allow early voting, but the rules vary, so check with your Secretary of State or local elections board for specifics where you are. Nikole Killion, Nancy Cordes, and Ed O'Keefe join me now. Nikole is a CBS News correspondent, Nancy is CBS News chief congressional correspondent, and Ed is a CBS News political correspondent. Welcome to you all. Nancy, I want to start with you. You are in Tempe. Our latest CBS News battleground tracker now shows Joe Biden leading, but within the margin of error. We last had this race tied in Arizona as of July. What are you hearing from voters there on the ground, and how has the state changed since 2016?
Well, Elaine, I can't remember the last time that I spoke to Democratic voters who were so angry in advance of an election. They were swearing, they were calling Donald Trump all kinds of names. They really disliked this president, and frankly, it wasn't reserved just for Democrats. We talked to independents, even some Republicans, who said they cannot vote for President Trump. And notably, the Republicans I spoke to who are sticking with him said that they're doing so so out of allegiance to the party rather than out of allegiance to him and his own political record. Now, it's important to note I'm here in Maricopa County. It's not the most conservative part of the state. We might encounter voters who feel differently if we had headed out into more rural areas. But here in Maricopa County, coronavirus is clearly having a big impact on the race. We talked to voter after voter who were frustrated by the way coronavirus was handled, and the Battleground Tracker backed that up. It found that voters, right and left, give Joe Biden a 13-point edge when it comes to who can handle the coronavirus better. And more than once, I talked to voters who said that they felt anyone could handle it better than President Trump has.
Well, Nikole, you have some new reporting on a pair of new Biden ads targeting black men in key swing states. You got an exclusive preview of the ads. Let's go ahead and watch.
Big thing that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can do is just rebuild trust.
I'm not going to agree with everything that anyone says. My wife will tell you that from the beginning. But who do I trust my children's future to? I trust Joe Biden more than anyone else.
Nikole, why focus specifically on black men?
Well, certainly the Biden campaign is focused on African-American voters as a whole, but in terms of African-American men, it comes down to one key number, and that is 13%. 13% of African-American men voted for President Trump in 2016, 3 times the number that black women did who overwhelmingly supported Hillary Clinton. So from that standpoint, the campaign does feel like it has some work to do. And interestingly, I was on a call with some members of the Biden campaign with one of its co-chairs saying that he doesn't think the Trump campaign will reach those numbers this time around, particularly because of this moment of racial reckoning that we are in, because, as Nancy alluded to, a dissatisfaction with the president's handling of the pandemic, which has disproportionately affected people of color, and even some of the disrespect that he has shown to some African-American male leaders like the late John Lewis. So from that standpoint, they do think that they can close the gap here. But make no mistake, the Trump campaign is continuing to court black men as well. We saw that in the Republican National Convention with folks like Tim Scott. They have other surrogates, Herschel Walker, the former football player who recently voiced an ad for the campaign. They have opened Black Voices for Trump offices in a number of cities and also put up ads in urban areas.
Well, Ed, we are talking about this 50-day countdown until November 3rd, but there remains a possibility that vote counting extends beyond the first Tuesday of the month. So how are the campaigns preparing for a possible legal battle?
Well, and I think everyone should be preparing for it to go beyond Election Day. I think we're looking at least a week, perhaps 2 or 3, before every state is able to really give us a signal and give us a sense of how they did. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you want your vote counted, it could just take a little while longer because there's an unprecedented demand for absentee ballots and therefore an unprecedented stress on the system. And in order to get it done accurately, it's going to take a little while. Both campaigns, we know, Elaine, are lawyering up, in essence. The Biden campaign announcing today that they have hundreds of lawyers across the country, most of them prepared in a pro bono way to help out if need be. The legal team is led by the Biden general counsel, who's now being helped by people like Bob Bauer, the former White House counsel to Barack Obama, who has worked with Democratic campaigns in the past. 2 former solicitors general, or the government attorney that argues cases before the Supreme Court, are now also on board as well, helping out, which is perhaps a signal that they know that they may need to take something all the way to the Supreme Court during the potential count or recount of ballots later this fall. And Eric Holder, the former attorney general, is also on board as a sort of liaison between the Biden campaign and what they will do with the DNC and what various entities across the country are doing to keep an eye out for voter suppression concerns, ballot access issues, any other potential dirty tricks that are pulled by people over the course of this. Both sides understand that there could be, at one time, 4 or 5 states in Florida 2000-like situations where you either have prolonged counts and disputes over the kinds of ballots that are being counted or rejected, or the potential for recounts in close elections, depending on how things go. As elections officials will tell you, Please let it be a blowout so that at least there's no dispute. Nothing suggests it's going to be a blowout on either side necessarily overall, so it's very likely that we'll all be waiting a little while beyond Election Day for a result. 50 days to go until Election Day, then the countdown begins and how long it takes until we actually have a result.
Right. Well, Nancy, President Trump is in Arizona today for the 5th time this year. Joe Biden has not been there since 2018. How do voters feel about that?
It really depends on their political bent, Elaine. Republicans sort of mock Biden. They say they don't really know where his campaign is, where he is. They want to know why he isn't out and about. Most Democrats we spoke to were pretty understanding. In fact, one nurse practitioner said she's actually really glad every time she sees Joe Biden and Kamala Harris wearing masks in public because she thinks that it sends the right message when Donald Trump has so rarely worn a mask in public. But there were Democrats and independents who said that they do want to hear more from Joe Biden nevertheless. Even if he isn't here in the state holding events, they want to hear more from him about his policies, his plans. They want to hear more from him about policing, about coronavirus, the economy. So, they want to know that he's engaged and they want to know that he is speaking to their issues. It is notable in this reliably red state, Elaine, that Biden has pulled ahead, at least by a few points, in our latest battleground tracker. This is a state that President Trump won in 2016 by nearly 4 points. So we asked voters, what do you think is going on? What is the shift caused by? And they gave us a number of answers. They said, first of all, the Latino population here in Arizona has only grown over the past 4 years. Joe Biden has an edge with Latinos, according to our battleground tracker, 62% of them saying they're going to support him. And also California residents have been moving here in a steady trickle over the past few years, looking for jobs, looking for a lower cost of living. And then, of course, the coronavirus, which was such a huge issue here in Arizona this summer, with a very large spike that is still receding in September. And so that is really top of mind for a lot of voters as well.
Oh, really fascinating to hear about those dynamics. Well, Nikole, before heading to Arizona for a campaign event, President Trump flew to California for a briefing on the historically large wildfires out west. And I want to play an exchange between the president and the head of California's Natural Resources Agency. Let's listen.
We want to work with you to really recognize the changing climate and what it means to our forests and actually work together with that science. That science is going to be key. Because if we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay. It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Hey, well, I don't think science knows, actually.
So President Trump appeared to insist that global warming will somehow reverse itself. And we know, though, at this point, after years of study, there is this scientific consensus that the Earth's climate is warming due to human activities. Where do each campaign stand on climate change?
Striking about that exchange is that before the president went to California, when he was still here in Las Vegas, he was also asked on the tarmac about some comments he made here over the weekend, where he suggested that forest management is what was needed to kind of contain and control these wildfires. And, he was asked about his views on that, to explain those comments and whether or not he does support climate change or the idea that it exists. And he pretty much dodged that part of it and focused on the forest management, that, trees and brush get dry, they go up like matchsticks, as he put it, that it's really about getting better control of these fire lines. And look, we know the president in the past has called climate change a hoax, but yet on the flip side, just a couple of days ago, he was calling himself an environmentalist, perhaps the greatest environmentalist since Teddy Roosevelt, when he was in Florida and he signed a moratorium on offshore drilling. So while he has done some environmentally friendly things, he also has rolled back a number of environmental regulations and, of course, has been a strong proponent of energy independence, which, of course, relies a lot on fossil fuels. To the contrast, you have former Vice President Biden, who today really lit into the president, literally and figuratively, calling him a climate arsonist. And the former vice president has put forth a $2 trillion climate plan, one in which that he wants to get back to some of the initiatives under the Obama-Biden administration, with more of a focus on green jobs, clean energy, and investing in renewable energy infrastructure.
All right, a lot of developments. I thank you all for helping us sift through them. Nikole Killion, Nancy Cordes, and Ed O'Keefe, thanks very much.